Part 1. Innocence Lost. In Chapter 1, Suri reflects on her past while observing the dragon-like creature she created, the Brin, which saved Elan but now lies dormant. She feels the weight of guilt for the deaths of her friends and her role in bringing the creature to life. Malcolm approaches, and they discuss the aftermath of their actions and the futility of peace, especially after Wraith's sacrifice. Suri struggles with the idea of her future, and Malcolm hints at a greater role for her. As tensions rise, Suri reluctantly hands Malcolm the sword to eventually put the creature to rest, awaiting her uncertain path ahead. In Chapter 2, Brin works on her book in a pigeon loft, keeping watch for a reply from the Fane. Malcolm arrives and warns her to avoid letting personal opinions distort the facts, particularly when writing about figures like Gath of Odian. He stresses the importance of accuracy, as her book could become an authoritative record. Brin reflects on the significance of deciphering ancient tablets, which she believes were created for her. Malcolm later reveals his plan to recover the tablets from Neith and asks her to teach others to read her symbols, as they may be essential in the future. Part 2. Exodus. In Chapter 1, Persephone, still recovering from battle injuries, is urged by Moya to travel in a wagon for her safety, despite Persephone's resistance. As they prepare to move, Persephone contemplates their next destination, with options including Meridid or Ren, while Nifron focuses on military strategy. He reveals their position of strength after defeating the Fane and plans to advance in the spring. Persephone suggests peace talks, but Nifron dismisses the idea, insisting on total conquest. Tensions arise as Persephone realizes Nifron's unyielding desire for revenge, contrasting her own belief in potential diplomacy. In Chapter 2, Gifford and Roan survey the destruction of Little Ren, where only Hopeless House remains intact. Survivors are salvaging what they can, preparing to leave for different destinations. Roan has been organizing wagons from the wreckage, and Gifford reflects on their bond, grateful for their growing closeness despite the devastation around them. Nifron arrives, asking about the carts Roan has been working on. Roan explains that Gifford is skilled with horses, and Nifron suggests adapting the carts for combat. Gifford agrees, confident in the possibility, as the group prepares for the challenges ahead. In Chapter 3, Tressa crosses a bridge with her belongings, carrying what little she has left and watching for potential threats. She reflects on her strained relationship with Moya and her feelings of being invisible. When she reaches the front of the procession, she encounters Malcolm, who confirms her suspicions that he is not an ordinary man, but a god. He explains that he has chosen her for an important task, giving her a key to a forbidden place, and telling her to gather 7 companions in the future. Tressa is reluctant but agrees, though she still doesn't understand the full implications. Part 3. Return of the Fave. In Chapter 1, Imali reflects on her heritage as a descendant of the first Fane, Gilindora, and her quiet life in Estrom Nadan. She harbors Makareta, a young Fhrey who has rebelled against the Fane and killed several Fhrey during the Grey Cloak insurrection. Makareta is traumatized, hiding her hair under a scarf to avoid detection. Imali enforces strict rules to keep them safe, including no use of magic and staying out of sight. Makareta struggles with basic tasks, and Imali tries to help her adjust. Imali hopes to help Makareta regain her strength, needing a powerful ally, not a broken one. In Chapter 2, Imali oversees the welcome for Fane Lothian's return, expecting a victorious procession. Instead, the once proud army returns defeated, limping, and bloodied. Despite the humiliation, Imali chooses not to publicly shame Lothian. When Lothian fails to address the crowd, Imali urges him to speak, but he directs her to address the people instead. Lothian reveals the grim reality. The Fhrey must either kill the runes or be killed. Imali, having received a peace offer from the rune leader, realizes that the situation has changed dramatically and vows never to underestimate the runes again. Part 4. Battle of the High Plains. In Chapter 1, Brin struggles with the demands of her daily life while preparing for war. She's frustrated by her responsibilities, particularly taking care of Pedera, an older woman who constantly calls on her. As the army prepares to march north, Brin feels a sense of dread about Tesh's safety, knowing the war is far from over. When Brin finally hears that Pedera needs her help with the birth of Persephone's baby, she rushes to the riverbank but is delayed by the chaos of the crowd. Her frustration grows as she navigates the obstacles to assist with the delivery. In Chapter 2, Tesh and his comrades prepare for a march, discussing their roles and equipment. Tesh, confident in his skills, dismisses the need for a shield, which concerns veteran soldier Grevius. As they move across the field, Tesh is eager for battle, but the march turns unexpectedly dangerous. The cohort is ambushed by a barrage of arrows from hidden Fhrey archers, throwing the soldiers into disarray. Tesh and Grevius take cover behind rocks, realizing they are being flanked by elves. Tesh is eager to fight, but is warned by Grevius, who is soon fatally struck by an arrow. In Chapter 3, Moya leads a charge with carts toward the enemy, initially part of an experimental maneuver to test the horse's ability to rush past advancing soldiers. However, after witnessing the slaughter of the first cohort, Moya orders an immediate advance. As the carts race toward the Fhrey archers, they narrowly avoid arrows aimed at them. Moya and her companion Gifford are thrown from the cart when the horse is struck by an arrow. They land in front of the Fhrey archers, with Gifford shielding Moya as arrows harmlessly bounce off his armor. The Fhrey then charge, and Moya scrambles for her bow. In Chapter 4, Brin, frustrated by a delay, jumps into a cold river to cross to the northern bank. Soaked and exhausted, she reaches Persephone's tent, where Persephone is in labor. Pedera orders Brin to fetch supplies, and Brin races through the camp, helping in the preparations. She steals water and cloths, bringing them back to the tent to assist with the birth. Just as the baby's birth progresses, Brin hears distant screams and sees signs of battle to the north. Realizing the army is fighting, Brin becomes anxious, fearing for Tesh's safety. In Chapter 5, Tesh watches in shock as Gifford and Moya are thrown from their cart, but they survive the fall. When the Fhrey archers drop their bows and charge, Tesh rushes in to help, taunting the elves with an insult to buy himself time. Using his sword skills, he kills 3 elves in quick succession. However, the remaining Fhrey hesitate, not advancing or retreating. Tesh feels the thrill of battle, but the flow of combat stops as he turns to see an archer aiming an arrow at him, just as Gifford calls out his name, warning him. In Chapter 6, Moya quickly grabs a Fhrey arrow and uses it to shoot at an archer targeting Tesh. Both arrows collide mid-flight, saving Tesh. As the archer tries to draw another arrow, Tesh charges, and Gifford swings his blade, destroying the archer's bow. The Fhrey archer is killed by both Tesh and Moya. The remaining Fhrey retreat, but the appearance of a dragon on the battlefield shifts the tide. The dragon's massive size terrifies the Fhrey, but it remains stationary, watching. Moya checks on Gifford, who jokes about a bruise on his knee from the earlier cart flip. In Chapter 7, the battle ends with the retreat of the Fhrey. Brin finds a folded piece of blue cloth and rushes back to Persephone's tent. Inside Persephone's baby, a tiny boy is born and crying. Pedera cleans the baby, and Roan wraps him in the cloth before handing him to Persephone, who, though exhausted, smiles as she holds her son. Brin notices the cloth's shimmer and recognizes it as a Galantian cape. Persephone, holding her baby, whispers a prayer, hoping that her son will outlive her. In Chapter 8, after the battle, the soldiers celebrate Persephone's successful delivery and Tesh's heroism. Edgar and Atkins drunkenly praise Tesh's kills, while Tesh remains distant and uneasy. He explains to Brin that, despite the accolades, he feels empty and disconnected from the joy of the victory. Tesh also grapples with his hatred for the Fhrey, which Brin questions given her own losses to them. Their conversation turns personal, with Tesh admitting his love for her and Brin teasing him about their future. They share a tender moment, affirming their promise to stay alive and together. Part 5. A change of plans. In Chapter 1, Mawandul observes a beautifully crafted table while listening to his father, the Fane, berate his council over their failure to find a solution to the rune threat. The Fane's temper flares, as he demands answers about the rune's new weapons, including a dragon guarding their camp. Despite Mawandul's ability to communicate with Jared, the Kel, the dragon remains unbeatable. The Fane grows increasingly frustrated, blaming Grindel's death and his inability to stop the runes. He dismisses the council, keeping Emily behind. Mawandul reflects on his new role and the loss of faith in their leadership. In Chapter 2, Imali waits in the council chambers, wondering what Lothian plans for her. Their relationship has been one of antagonism, but she senses he's not going to execute her. Lothian reveals he's considering the rune leader's peace proposal, but is uncertain about its timing. Imali suggests responding to the runes, but Lothian fears it might show weakness. He admits the Fhrey may have no choice but to join the Umalan tribe if they don't act soon. For the first time, Imali sees Lothian's desperation and begins to question her earlier judgment of him. In Chapter 3, Vasek, the Master of Secrets, warns Mawandul about the dangers facing their people. With morale low and forces stretched thin, he suggests that the Grey Cloaks may be resurging, possibly causing trouble. Vasek reveals that only 4 Moralith remain in the city, including Mawandul, and questions if their enemies could exploit their vulnerability. The conversation shifts to Makareta, a Moralith who may have murdered several of their kind. Vasek cautions Mawandul to be wary if he encounters her, as she is skilled and dangerous. Mawandul, confident in his own abilities, remains undeterred. Part 6. The Dragon and the Pigeon. In Chapter 1, Persephone, mother to Nolan, reflects on the sorrow of losing 3 sons before him. She fears losing Nolan as well, but is grateful for Justine's help. As Persephone considers the challenges of leadership and motherhood, Brin, a keeper, arrives with news. Nolan is growing quickly, and the conversation turns to the title for the child of a Koenig. Brin reveals that a pigeon from Estromnadon has arrived with a message from the Fane offering peace. Persephone, who had almost given up hope of receiving a response, is surprised and intrigued by the proposal. In Chapter 2, Suri struggles with memories of her late companions, especially Arian, as she trains Gifford in the art. Gifford is improving, but remains limited in his abilities, and Suri, despite her efforts, avoids forming closer bonds with him. When Nifron arrives with news of increased resistance from the Miralith, he demands that Suri create another Galera Brown to help in battle. Suri refuses, revealing that creating one requires a sacrifice, specifically the life of someone dear to her. The tension escalates when Nifron pressures her and Suri threatens to leave the camp, disgusted by his disregard for the cost of such magic. In Chapter 3, Persephone and Nifron discuss Suri's refusal to create another dragon. Nifron, frustrated, sees the mystic's decision as a hindrance to the war effort, but Persephone warns him not to anger Suri. She explains that creating a Galera Brown requires the sacrifice of someone dear, something Suri cannot do. Nifron, still angry, prepares to leave, but listens when Persephone shares that the Fane has sent a message proposing peace. However, Nifron rejects the offer, preferring revenge over diplomacy. Persephone, concerned about him, decides not to respond to the Fane, feeling unsure about the war's direction. In Chapter 4, Suri, frustrated with the expectations placed on her, contemplates returning to the Hawthorn Glen. She feels like a failure, unable to meet the demands of teaching, friendship, or magic. Gifford joins her and shares his own story of being burdened with impossible expectations, much like hers. He reveals that his mother died giving birth to him, fulfilling a prophecy that he would be fast enough to save everyone. Suri is surprised by his vulnerability, and they bond over their shared struggles. Though she rejects the idea of being friends, she softens toward him, and they part ways, still conflicted. Part 7. The Battle of Harwood. In Chapter 1, Tesh leads a small group of soldiers through a dangerous forest facing deadly elves skilled in stealth. After several men fall to elvish attacks, Tesh organizes his team into a defensive circle, using his tactical expertise to outmaneuver the elves. Despite taking some hits, Tesh and his men fight fiercely, killing many elves. Tesh reflects on how much more dangerous this fight feels compared to previous battles. As the battle rages, Tesh realizes that his group's unity and his growing mastery in combat have transformed them into a formidable force. They survive, but the day is far from over. In Chapter 2, Brin, overwhelmed by the carnage from the Battle of the Harwood, assists in the healing tent where the wounded and dead pour in. She struggles with the horrific sights and the loss of familiar faces, especially fearing for Tesh. After hours of work, she steps outside to clear her head, contemplating Tesh's likely death. To her shock, she finds him alive, though exhausted and covered in blood. He shares the grim news of their losses, including the death of Eris, who was killed by a Fhrey. Tesh's survival and unexpected return bring Brin some comfort amid the chaos. Part 8. The Face of Evil. In Chapter 1, Imali interacts with Makareta, a Moralith girl who has become increasingly disheveled and distant after a year in her care. Despite Imali's efforts, Makareta is consumed by guilt for breaking Farrell's law by killing a Fhrey. She believes she is soulless, doomed to eternal torment, and unable to enter fire, the afterlife. Imali tries to reason with her, but Makareta's despair deepens as she feels that no amount of good deeds or empathy will matter in her fate. The chapter highlights their emotional tension, with Macaretta's sense of hopelessness and Emily's struggle to understand her pain. In Chapter 2, Imali attends a special meeting called by the Fane, Lothian, at the Arenthenon. She reflects on Macaretta's strange claim of losing her soul, which challenges Imali's pragmatic beliefs. As the meeting begins, Lothian shares news about the war with the runes. Despite recent setbacks, including a dragon conjured by the runes, the Fhrey forces have gained a significant victory. Imali remains skeptical of Lothian's optimistic outlook, feeling that the situation is not as simple as it seems. The chapter ends with a toast to a hopeful future, though Imali doubts its certainty. Part 9. Stalemate. In Chapter 1, Nifron inspects the progress of a bridge being constructed over the Nidwalden River. He meets two dwarves, Flood and Frost, who explain the delays and dangers of the project, including attacks from the Miralith and the challenges posed by untrained laborers. Frost reveals that the tower's magic interferes with the construction, and the water level has mysteriously dropped. As Nifron converses with the dwarves, he notices strange behavior from the Fhrey, signaling an impending danger. The river suddenly dries up, and Nifron rushes to his chariot, realizing a catastrophe is unfolding. The bridge is destroyed as the river returns. In Chapter 2, the camp is divided into 4 sections: crafting, food preparation, healing, and military strategy, likely inspired by Nifron's methodical thinking. Suri reflects on the Harwood Forest, contrasting it with the Crescent. She visits Persephone's tent, finding it full of tension, and discovers the Fhrey have sent a cryptic message seeking peace, but only with her. The Fhrey refuse to negotiate with Nifron, the rune leaders, or traitors. Persephone, concerned for Suri's safety, warns her of the danger, but Suri accepts the mission. She believes it is her path, influenced by the vision of Arian and Malcolm's teachings. Part 10. The Trouble with Tressa. In Chapter 1, Brin encounters Tressa, an older woman ostracized by the clan after her husband's death. Despite her reputation for cruelty, Brin finds Tressa sobbing in the mud, devastated by the death of her lover Gelston, whom she had cared for. Tressa reveals that, despite their tumultuous relationship, she had once felt a fleeting moment of affection when he hugged her. The encounter deeply moves Brin, who reflects on the pain of loss and the stark contrast between Tressa's past cruelty and the raw vulnerability she shows now. The chapter underscores themes of suffering, mercy, and human connection. In Chapter 2, Brin returns from the rain to find Padera scolding her for being out in such weather. Brin shares the news of Gelston's death and reveals that Tressa had been caring for him despite her rough reputation. Padera expresses skepticism about Tressa's motives, but Brin argues that Tressa's grief shows a side of her rarely seen. She reflects on how Tressa, despite her past, may have loved Gelston. Brin decides to help Tressa by offering her friendship and teaching her to read, believing Tressa needs a purpose to heal from her isolation. In Chapter 3, Brin tries to teach Tressa to read, showing her a stack of parchments that document important events. Tressa is initially suspicious, thinking it's a trick, but Brin insists it's an opportunity for a new job. When Tressa throws the parchments into the river in anger, Brin dives in to save them, risking her life to retrieve a few. Brin reveals that her parents' memories are recorded in the pages, making their loss deeply personal. Tressa is left confused by Brin's emotional reaction, while Brin, devastated, returns to her home with the precious pages. In Chapter 4, Brin is devastated over the loss of her parchments, feeling that Tressa's actions destroyed her dream of creating a universal writing system. Padera urges her to move past the setback, but Brin is too discouraged to continue. Tressa unexpectedly returns with a stack of saved pages, though she's covered in dirt and wounds. Brin, moved by Tressa's gesture, offers to make her a new dress if she agrees to try learning to read. Despite her initial reluctance, Tressa agrees to the deal, and Brin finds a new sense of purpose. Padera sees Tressa's defiance as a sign of her resilience. Part 11. Techalors. In Chapter 1, Tesh leads his soldiers through a forest ambush by elven archers. Though some of his men are injured or killed, including Meeks, a new recruit, Tesh remains calm and tactical. He uses his knowledge of elven tactics to guide his men and eliminate the attackers, realizing the elves are younger and inexperienced. After the skirmish, Tesh reflects on the decline of elven strength in the region, noting how fewer elves are now willing to fight. Despite losing Meeks, the group must hurry back to meet a mystic, as they are already late for their rendezvous. In Chapter 2, Tesh arrives at the Tekklers' camp and is reunited with Suri, a mystic he hasn't seen in years. She is on a mission to the tower, Avampartha, despite warnings of its danger. Tesh and his men explain the perilous presence of the Mirrleaf, who watch the area and sabotage attempts to cross. Suri reveals that Persephone sent her to speak with the Fhrey and end the war. Tesh is skeptical, believing she will be killed. But Suri remains confident, insisting she was invited to the tower, and is determined to complete her mission. Part 12. Avampartha. In Chapter 1, Suri walks toward the tower of Avampartha, following a glowing path. She feels both reassured and apprehensive about her journey. Upon reaching the tower, she is struck by its beauty and uniqueness, but remains cautious. Suri uses her art to cross a precarious stone bridge and enters the tower, sensing a presence watching her. She meets Jared, a Fhrey elder, who leads her inside. They converse about her mission to negotiate peace, though Jared's motives remain unclear. Suri, uneasy with the idea of staying indoors, is offered food, rest, and a bath before further discussions. In Chapter 2, Suri struggles to sleep, feeling confined in Avampartha's quiet, lifeless room. She feels both restless and energized by the power around her. Jared arrives with a gift and informs her of her transportation to Estromnadon, the Fhrey capital, for a personal audience with the Fane. However, Suri is shocked when Jared presents her with a collar designed to nullify her power. The Fane requires this to ensure she cannot harm him or his people. Though hesitant, Suri accepts the collar, recognizing the potential for peace despite the discomfort, and agrees to continue her journey. In Chapter 3, Jared feels a sense of relief after placing the collar on Suri, neutralizing her power. He reflects on her strength, which had been a threat to the Fhrey, and how the Fane's decision to restrain her will end the war through annihilation, not peace. Suri, enraged by the betrayal, strikes out at Ossel with her staff, but Jared uses the collar to disarm her. Unable to use the art or be controlled by the Fhrey, she is physically subdued, restrained with leather straps, and ordered locked up, marking her captivity. Part 13. My Prince. In Chapter 1, Mawandul watches Treya struggle to start a fire using primitive methods, mocking her efforts. He demonstrates his power by summoning a massive fire with ease. Treya, unfazed, challenges Mawandul's pride, hinting at her own knowledge and experiences. They discuss the rune, whom Mawandul is transporting in a cage, dismissing her as a dangerous animal. Treya questions how a rune can be dangerous, but Mawandul recalls a past encounter where he barely escaped death due to the rune's power. He reassures her, downplaying the threat, while internally remaining cautious about the rune's potential danger. Part 14. Down by the riverbank. In Chapter 1, Suri is trapped in a cold, windowless cell, stripped of her Asuka and left in a linen shift. Desperate to escape, she beats on the door, injuring herself in the process. Her panic and physical pain overwhelm her as she spirals into a disoriented, half-conscious state. Voices mock her, calling her a vicious little thing and commenting on her blood. As the isolation continues, she loses track of time, consumed by the repetitive thought, "I have to get out!" The cycle ends when she hears a voice telling her that Mawandul is coming to get her, replacing her desperate thoughts with a new, ominous fear. In Chapter 2, Tesh and his group are observing the mysterious Avampartha Tower, which has become a symbol of intrigue and defense for the elves. Tesh is focused on uncovering how the elves cross the dangerous Nidwalden River, as they've been doing so with regularity despite its fast current. After days of searching, Tesh suspects a secret, but the mystery persists. The group notices a cage on wheels being wheeled out from the tower, drawing their attention. Suddenly screams echo across the river, revealing the elves transporting a struggling captive into the cage, causing Tesh to abandon his search for Meeks. Part 15. The Animal in the Cage. In Chapter 1, Mawandul and Treya approach Avampartha and notice a horse-drawn wagon with a cage, making Mawandul uneasy. The Fhrey despise the runes and their ways, and Mawandul reflects on the history of their people's struggles. As they approach the cage, they find a rune inside. Jared, an elderly Fhrey, arrives and urgently orders Mawandul to take the rune to Estromnadon, his father, to request a dragon for the tower's defense. Despite Mawandul's exhaustion and reluctance, Jared insists on immediate action, emphasizing the desperate need for the dragon to save Erevan and their people. In Chapter 2, Suri regains consciousness to find herself in a moving wagon, trapped in a cage. Despite the breeze, she struggles to breathe and is overwhelmed by panic. Her hands are bloody from scratching at the cage, and her nails are damaged. As she rocks and moans, she tries to reassure herself that it's better than the previous cell and that she won't be in the cage forever. However, her mind is consumed with the desperate need to escape, and she fights the urge to throw herself at the bars, unable to ignore the suffocating fear. In Chapter 3, Suri remains trapped in the wagon as it moves through a forest, feeling isolated and suffocated. Two Fhrey speak nearby, one concerned for her condition, while the other dismisses her as a mere animal. The female Fhrey, noticing Suri's distress, tries to approach but is warned off by a male Fhrey, Mawandul, who mocks her. Suri finally speaks, revealing her hatred for Mawandul, who admits to killing Arian, a figure Suri loved. Suri laughs at the absurdity of the situation, finding a moment of relief and regaining a sense of control over her emotions. Part 16. 6 dead, 1 captured. In Chapter 1, Tesh and Edgar inform Persephone about Suri's capture. Despite walking into the tower willingly, Suri was later forcibly taken away in a cage-like wagon, screaming as she fought her captors. Persephone is stunned, struggling to understand why Suri didn't stop them, suspecting the involvement of the Orenfar. Tesh further reports the loss of 6 men during the trip, including Anwar, who died in an ambush. Persephone is shaken, while Nifron, though less visibly affected, asks for further details before dismissing the soldiers. The cold wind outside mirrors the tense atmosphere inside the Koenig's lodge. In Chapter 2, Tesh returns to camp with Edgar after a long wilderness mission. They briefly discuss the loss of several men during the trip. Tesh meets Brin, who is overjoyed to see him. They share a tender moment before Tesh tries to avoid talking about the death of his men. Brin eagerly shares her progress on a book she's working on, and they discuss plans for preserving the pages. The conversation shifts to their future, with Brin pressing Tesh about marriage and starting a family. Tesh insists he must first focus on the war to ensure their safety before settling down. In Chapter 3, Nifron and Persephone argue over sending Suri to Avampartha. Nifron is upset, feeling that Suri's mission was a mistake and that peace talks with the Fane were futile. Persephone defends the decision, explaining that Suri was the only one the Fane would speak to, hoping to end the war. Nifron reveals his belief that the Fane seeks to learn the secret to creating dragons from Suri, which would lead to their victory. He warns that by seeking peace, Persephone has unwittingly given the Fane the means to destroy them, ensuring their defeat. Part 17. Malcolm told me. In Chapter 1, Tressa reflects on the stark contrast between her life and Brin's youthful innocence despite their similar hardships. Tressa, who has faced much loss and pain, struggles with learning to read under Brin's guidance. Brin interrupts their lesson to inform Tressa that Suri has been captured by the Fhrey. Suri had been tricked into a peace negotiation, but was imprisoned and may be taken to Estromnadon to teach the elves how to make dragons. Brin quickly leaves, feeling the weight of the news, and Tressa struggles to grasp the gravity of the situation. In Chapter 2, Tressa, hesitant but determined, enters the Koenig's tent and reveals she knows how to save Suri. She tells Persephone and the others about a door leading to the Frey's capital and an underground passage that could help them rescue Suri. Despite their disbelief, the group listens as Tressa insists she isn't lying and that Malcolm told her about it. Moya remains skeptical and dismissive, but Persephone thanks Tressa for sharing the information. Tressa, overwhelmed by their pity, runs out of the tent unsure of her place among them. Part 20. The Mystery in the Garden. In Chapter 1, Imali, seeking answers about Mawandul, meets Trilos, a strange figure who watches the mysterious door. Trilos reveals he knows more than he should, including that Fenelius once entered the door, contradicting official beliefs. He claims the door is locked, but not in a conventional way, hinting at deeper mysteries. Trilos also reveals that Mawandul went to Avampartha to fetch a rune under the orders of the Fane to learn how to create dragons. Emily realizes that her knowledge and plans are incomplete. Trilos warns her that her current strategy will fail, suggesting she will need a second Miralith to succeed. In Chapter 2, Imali returns home to find Macaretta anxiously asking about Mawandul. Their conversation quickly escalates as Macaretta insists she didn't use the art, but Imali remains skeptical. Frustrated, Imali reveals that Mawandul is fine, though she hasn't confirmed it personally. She explains that he was sent by his father to escort a rune prisoner back to Estramnadan. Macaretta's concern seems sincere, but Imali wonders if the girl is manipulating her like she did with Mawandul. Despite this, Imali is left unsure about what's truly happening. Part 19. In the Land of Enog. In Chapter 1, Tressa reflects on her past actions and Malcolm's request for her to save Suri. After visiting Roan and Gifford's tent, she nervously asks them to join her on the mission, revealing that Malcolm had told her to gather 7 people for the journey. Gifford accepts the impossible task with his usual deadpan attitude, and Roan, after some hesitation, agrees to go as well. Despite Tressa's self-doubt and the uncertainty of the mission, Roan supports her, stating that Malcolm's words give them no choice but to follow through. In Chapter 2, Roan insists on inviting Brin despite her skepticism to discuss a plan to save Suri. Tressa reveals that Malcolm, who knows things he shouldn't, hinted at a hidden passage to reach Suri, which could turn the tide in the war. Tesh questions the plan's viability, highlighting the dangers of the swamp of Ith, but Brin suggests that finding the passage and reporting it to Persephone and Nifron could lead to military support. Tressa finally admits that the entrance is hidden, and they'll need the help of a person living on the island, the Tetlin Witch. In Chapter 3, Brin returns to the Koenig's Lodge to inform Persephone about the plan to search for a hidden passage under the river in the swamp of Ith, which could help them reach the Fhrey capital. Despite her determination, Persephone refuses to let Brin and her group go due to the dangers involved. Brin insists that they only plan to scout, not fight, and argues that they must try for Suri's sake. However, Persephone, recalling the losses she's endured, rejects the idea, and Brin leaves frustrated, feeling misunderstood. Part 20. Beyond the Light of Day. In Chapter 3, Brin, Roan, Gifford, and Tressa prepare for a journey to the swamp of Ith, aiming to investigate a possible passage to the Free capital. Tesh, initially refusing to join, argues with Brin about the danger, but ultimately agrees under the condition that she promises to run if things go wrong. The group faces challenges, including tensions with Persephone's orders and the number of travelers. As the group heads out, Rain joins them, feeling it's a sign. The party, now 8, sets off into uncertain territory, hoping to find a way to rescue Suri. In Chapter 4, after days of rain, Brin and her group journey toward the swamp of Ith, the location of the Tetlin Witch. Brin reflects on her memories of Fall and her current tense relationships with the group, particularly with Tesh, who remains distant. As they walk, Gifford explains his struggles with magic and his fears about its potential consequences. The group learns they are nearing the swamp, where they must find a hidden island. Tressa reveals a song about the Tetlin Witch, and the group debates the truth of the legend, with Moya growing increasingly skeptical. Part 21. The Swamp of Ith. In Chapter 1, Tesh struggles with guilt and fear as he leads Brin and the group through the dangerous swamp of Ith. He regrets bringing her along, feeling helpless in this unfamiliar terrain, unable to rely on his instincts. As they wade through the swamp, Tesh is haunted by past traumas and the constant fear of something unseen lurking in the mist. His mind conjures dark images of Brin in danger. The group encounters a massive serpent, but it slithers away, leaving Tesh to worry about what dangers lie ahead as night falls. In Chapter 2, the group rests in the swamp as night falls. Tesh tries to comfort Brin, still frustrated with himself. Tensions rise when Tekshin wants to scout ahead, but Moya insists they stay together. The swamp becomes eerie, with dark shapes and unsettling sounds. Tesh and Tekshin discover a nest of 3 eyeballs, which Tekshin finds odd. They speculate on the possible significance of the 3 eyes, but decide to continue without investigating further. The group presses on through the dark, unease growing, and Tesh prepares for whatever might lie ahead as the night deepens. In Chapter 3, Moya struggles with her animosity toward Tressa, blaming her for spreading damaging rumors. As they wade through the swamp, Gifford senses something eerie nearby, and Tekshin reports seeing a figure. A soldier, seemingly Meeks, a man Tesh's team lost, appears and approaches. Moya hesitates but does not shoot. The figure reveals itself as a mains, a ghost tormenting Tesh for past wrongs. The ghost accuses Tesh of killing his fellow soldiers, and Moya questions Tesh about it. Techen defends Tesh, explaining the deaths were fated, and Moya begins to doubt the ghost's words. Part 22. Treya's Gifts. In Chapter 1, Mawandul is disturbed by the rune's constant stare from its cage. He reflects on the creature's hatred for him due to past events, particularly his actions involving Arian. Though he considers using torture or magic to extract secrets from the rune, he faces the limitations of its collar and the risk of killing it. Treya, his servant, suggests giving the rune food and a blanket, but Mawandul dismisses her concern. He grows frustrated with her for implying the rune could teach the art and feels guilt afterward for his harshness. Alone, he contemplates his troubles. In Chapter 2, Suri receives food and a blanket from Treya, who shows unexpected kindness despite the tension between Suri and Mawandul. Suri is grateful but confused by Treya's actions as she struggles with her captivity. Treya, sensing Suri's discomfort, shares a bit about herself, explaining that she's a Gwydri, not a Miralith, and empathizes with Suri's treatment. Suri hints at her desire to be released from the cage, but knows it's impossible without a key. As she warms up and reflects, she begins to realize not all Fhrey are bad, though Mawandul remains a source of bitterness. Part 23. Whispers in the Mist. In Chapter 1, Moya and her group trek through a swamp, encountering a parade of weary travelers, including humans, dwarfs, and Fhrey, all burdened by grief and exhaustion. As they continue, Gifford hears strange voices from the trees, which he believes are discussing them. When Moya expresses uncertainty about their next move, Tressa suggests asking the trees for guidance. Gifford attempts to communicate with them, and after some awkward conversation, a line of leaves forms on the water. The group decides to follow the path, hoping it leads to the Tetlan Witch or dry land. In Chapter 2, Moya and her group reach a beach, where they finally find dry land. Moya, feeling the weight of leadership, takes the first watch, though she struggles with her role and growing suspicions about Tesh. As the group sleeps, Moya contemplates the futility of their journey, doubting the existence of the Tetlan Witch and questioning their motivations. She grows increasingly frustrated with Tressa, who seems to have led them on this impossible mission. Eventually, Moya dozes off, and Tressa takes over watch, leaving Moya to wrestle with her growing distrust and uncertainty about their quest. In Chapter 3, Moya wakes to find the group lost in dense fog near the Green Sea. Tensions rise as the group debates the existence of the island they're searching for. Techen, Tessa, and Tesh have explored, but found no way to reach the island, and Moya expresses her doubts. The conversation turns to Malcolm, with Tressa insisting he knows everything. Roan, Rain, and others begin questioning Malcolm's powers. The group waits, hoping the fog will lift, but Moya remains skeptical. Roan believes the water will recede, possibly revealing the island. Moya wonders what they'll face if they succeed. Part 24. Unpleasant Paths. In Chapter 1, Mawandul and Treya travel with a caged rune, drawing the attention of villagers. Mawandul is irritated by the growing crowd and the discomfort of the journey. The rune is treated with curiosity, and some villagers even throw stones at it. Treya insists that the rune is a person, but Mawandul dismisses this, believing it is just a trained animal. As they camp, tensions rise over their differing views of the creature. Mawandul plans to take the rune to his father for further examination, showing little concern for what happens to her afterward. In Chapter 2, Suri reflects on her painful journey, trapped and tormented in a cage. She struggles with intense physical and emotional suffering, haunted by fear, nausea, and a feeling of suffocation. Despite the cruelty of her captors, including stones thrown at her, she tries to escape mentally by recalling memories of her home in Hawthorne Glen. Her mind wanders to a vision of a butterfly, which leads her to contemplate the nature of transformation and imprisonment. Suri wonders what comes after the chrysalis, believing she has already earned her wings, yet still feels trapped. Part 25. The Hidden Isle. In Chapter 1, Gifford wakes from a nap to hear urgent voices calling for haste. The trees are warning them to hurry, but no one knows exactly why. The water level has begun to rise, and Moya, Roan, and the group struggle to determine their next move. Roan, focused and determined, leads the way, walking across the water as if guided by some unseen force. Gifford follows her, facing difficulties with his injured leg. The group finally crosses to what seems like an island, but the rising tide and dangers lurking beneath the water add to their uncertainty about their destination. Part 26. Dragon Hill. In Chapter 1, Persephone climbs a hill in the early hours, seeking solitude. She struggles with guilt over past actions, particularly towards Wraith, whose sacrifice still haunts her. Alone, she speaks to a dragon, once a silent confidant confessing her regrets and sorrow. She reflects on the choices made, wondering if things could have been different. As the dragon's eye opens, Persephone reveals her love for Wraith and her apology. When she prepares to leave, the dragon speaks two words, even now, a chilling reminder of the lasting impact of her actions. Part 26. Dragon Hill. In Chapter 1, Persephone climbs a hill in the early hours, seeking solitude. She struggles with guilt over past actions, particularly towards Wraith, whose sacrifice still haunts her. Alone, she speaks to a dragon, once a silent confidant confessing her regrets and sorrow. She reflects on the choices made, wondering if things could have been different. As the dragon's eye opens, Persephone reveals her love for Wraith and her apology. When she prepares to leave, the dragon speaks two words, even now, a chilling reminder of the lasting impact of her actions. In Chapter 2, Brin and Moya arrive at a secluded island, where they meet a woman named Muriel. Initially thought to be the Tetlin witch, Muriel denies being one and invites them inside her cozy hut. After learning they were misinformed by a friend, Moya and Brin discover that Muriel has knowledge of a passageway to the Fhrey homeland, but it involves a mythical door said to be the gateway between this world and the next. Muriel explains that the entrance to the afterlife is near, and only those who die can pass through, hinting at a dangerous journey ahead. Part 28. The Key. In Chapter 1, Brin, Moya, Tekshin, Tressa, and the others visit Muriel, who lives alone in a remote home. She serves them chicken soup, warning them about the dangers of food from witches. Muriel shares her backstory, revealing she once lived in a village called Tetlin but left after witnessing the death of everyone she loved. As they talk, they mention a man named Malcolm, who Tressa claims is a god. Muriel, however, reacts sharply when they reveal his first name, Turin. She reveals that Malcolm cursed her with eternal life, leading her to despise him deeply. In Chapter 2, Muriel's behavior unsettles the group as they remain silent, watching her clean. Brin, reminded of her mother, joins in to help, and Muriel reveals she's never been to Rel, explaining the underworld's complexity. The conversation turns to the mysterious Eaton's Key, a powerful object that can open all doors, even in fire. Muriel explains that if Tressa dies with it, she can unlock the gates to fire, but warns of Turin's manipulation. The chapter ends with Muriel revealing that Turin is her father, adding layers of complexity to their mission. Part 29. Father and Son. In Chapter 1, Suri is trapped in a cage, overwhelmed by panic and trying to escape mentally by imagining herself in a field. As the wagon stops, she opens her eyes to see herself surrounded by Fhrey who react with disgust at her appearance. Suri realizes she's arrived in Estromnadon. The crowd mocks her, but she responds with a mysterious insult, causing the onlookers to retreat in fear. Despite her bravado, Suri is still consumed by fear, reminding herself that she's reached the end of her journey, but struggles with the anxiety of being confined. In Chapter 2, Mawandul returns to the throne room and faces his father, Fane Lothian, who is visibly drunk. Lothian criticizes Mawandul's upbringing and character, revealing his long-held disappointment. Despite the harsh words, he admits that Mawandul's recent discovery of the rune Miralith has impressed him. However, Mawandul is disillusioned by his father's behavior and drunken ramblings, seeing him as a fool rather than the revered leader he once imagined. Lothian plans to use the Secret of Dragons to wage war on the runes, but Mawandul doubts his father's ability to lead effectively. Part 30. The Fetid Pool. In Chapter 1, Moya confronts Muriel about the key that can supposedly allow them to die, travel to fire, and return. Muriel confirms the key's power and warns of the dangers in fire, where failure could mean staying dead forever. Moya worries about her friends, especially Ronan and Gifford, who may follow Tressa's dangerous plan. Muriel explains that Turin, her father, is responsible for many manipulations, and Moya feels increasingly trapped by the web of lies and impossible choices. As tensions rise, Moya grapples with the gravity of their situation and what it means for everyone's survival. In Chapter 2, Moya confronts Roan, Gifford, and Rain, who are determined to follow Tressa's plan to die and travel to the Fhrey city. Moya tries to stop them, warning of the dangers and the uncertainty of Tressa's intentions, but they remain resolute, believing in the power of Malcolm and the key. Moya, frustrated and fearful, considers using force to stop them, but faces resistance from her companions, especially Brin. As tensions rise, Tressa reveals the plan is set to begin, and Muriel agrees to lead them to the entrance to Rel. Moya's struggle to protect her friends intensifies. In Chapter 3, Muriel leads the group to a boggy pool, revealing it as the entrance to fire. She demonstrates by sacrificing a duck, which is swallowed by the mud, showing how the dead enter fire. Muriel explains the importance of carrying a stone for sinking and a feather for rising symbols that guide the dead. Despite Moya's protests, Tressa, determined to find a way out of her struggles, steps forward and, with a defiant declaration, throws herself into the pool. As Tressa sinks, Moya desperately tries to save her, but Tressa disappears, leaving the group in shock. In Chapter 4, Moya and the others mourn the loss of Tressa, with Moya breaking down emotionally. Roan and Gifford decide to enter the pool together, hoping to follow Tressa despite warnings. After a tearful kiss, they both submerge, leaving Moya distraught. Moya argues with Techin, trying to convince him not to join her in the dangerous journey, but he insists, revealing his deep feelings for her. Muriel offers cryptic advice about navigating the afterlife, suggesting help from Turin. Moya and Techin prepare to enter the pool together, with Moya resigned to the uncertain fate ahead. Part 31. Facing the Fane. In Chapter 1, Suri is freed from her cage, overwhelmed by the sunlight and air. She's surrounded by soldiers, their spears pointed at her as they escort her through a vibrant plaza toward a palace. Despite the fear, Suri is grateful for her release, but soon realizes she's being taken to the Fane. As she observes the city, she reflects on the jumbled images of her journey, recognizing the way the Fhrey view her, like a dangerous beast in a cage. Suri recalls Arian's words about her potential to change the world, but questions how she can when they've taken away her power. In Chapter 2, Suri is brought before the Fane in his throne room, a dark, forest-like space. The Fane demands she reveal the secret to creating dragons, but Suri refuses. The tension escalates as she challenges him, recounting her mistreatment and demanding an apology. The Fane, enraged, threatens to kill her, but is interrupted by Suri's resistance and the collar that prevents him from using the art on her. He orders Vasek, his subordinate, to take Suri away and torture her into compliance. Suri is dragged to a small, lightless prison as Vasek plans to bury her alive. Part 32. The Fate of Fools. In Chapter 1, Brin watches as Moya, Techin, and others die, struggling to understand the senselessness of it all. She realizes Malcolm may be a god and his plans involve her, particularly the Book of Brin. Despite Tesh's objections, Brin feels compelled to enter a mysterious pool, believing it holds the answers she seeks. Tesh, torn between love and revenge, initially tries to stop her, but eventually lets her go. As Brin steps into the pool, she is engulfed by thick, icy muck, her screams unheard, while Muriel silently observes, waiting for what's to come.